Hi guys, I'm Raquel Rodriguez and this is the Babcock Hoops Q&A sessions. Today we have our very own Matt Babcock and Doc Martin joining me. Matt Babcock is an NBA draft analyst, a former NBA agent, and is the owner and founder of Babcock Hoops. Doc Martin is a 15-year experienced NBA scout and currently serves as the director of basketball operations for Babcock Hoops. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken the world by storm, essentially putting just about everything on hold, the NBA included. However, it was just recently announced that the NBA will be returning to play and that the draft is set for October 15th. Matt, now that we have some dates set in place, what are your expectations for the NBA pre-draft process?
Well, I mean, my first thought is we got a long time until the draft, so essentially it's going to be a pre-draft process that is twice as long as it usually is. Most of these players that when they finish their college season, sign with an agent, start training, and so that starts March, April. So I mean, we got a big window for these guys just working out on their own, and they haven't been traveling to visit with teams in their cities, as they do in most years. So it's a long process, but still there's not a whole lot to do. There's Zoom interviews. Everything's done remotely, and just a weird time for agents, players, and teams. So we'll see how it unfolds, but it's looking like there's not going to be any kind of typical pre-draft process, even though it is later.
In interviews with prospects, who in the front office is speaking with players, and what kind of information is the organization hoping to learn?
Well, it'll be one or three individuals interviewing the prospects. It'll be the GM, assistant GM, and director of college scouting. And in my opinion, the most important one out of the three will be the director of college scouting, because he's responsible for collecting the thoughts and evaluations from the entire scouting staff, and to kind of put it into one concise report for the assistant GM and GM to review. And so that way they'll kind of know how to poke and prod the prospects when they're asking them various questions, because by this time, all the research is pretty much done, and they're just hoping to get to know the player on a much personal level to find out their interests, background, and maybe different incidents they may have had while they were in college, and see how forthcoming they'll be with the information.
Matt, with you being a former NBA agent, can you tell us what goes on behind the scenes in regards to players preparing for these types of interviews?
Well, I mean, I think every agent does things slightly different. For me personally, when I was an agent, my approach to sort of tackling that part of the pre-draft process was first and foremost, once I sign my player, do everything I can to get to know him personally, get to know his personality, his background, and try and figure out what these teams are hearing in their intel calls, and get ahead of them, and prepare our players for these interviews, and maybe some tough questions. Some players, I think the interview process is harder than for others. I mean, if a player has baggage, or if there's concerns from a team, we've got some tough questions to prepare our player for, and so we do our best to get them comfortable. Definitely, never wanted to encourage any player to lie or tiptoe around any issues, but more of how to kind of grab the bull by the horns, and answer questions honestly, but also be able to walk away from the interview looking good. And so that was just the general approach: is get the guys comfortable and prepared for some invasive questions.
Matt, do you think that there will be a draft combine this year? And if there is, what should we expect?
Well, I mean, I think that with them moving the draft date to October 15th, it gives them a big window to organize something and have a better chance of executing it. Like I said before, I don't see there being a world right now where guys are flying around going to visit teams in their cities. But a combine, I do think would be doable. And if at the very least, getting all the guys together to get physical measurements and medical information for these teams prior to the draft would be important. And then I'm sure the NBA is going to prioritize doing some stuff on the floor, because that would be a way of generating some extra TV money. Because I mean, I'm sure everybody sitting at home would love to watch all these guys, whether it's working out or playing live. So we'll see. I am expecting there to be some sort of combine, though, at this point.
Doc, how valuable do you consider the combine to be for NBA teams in evaluating prospects?
Well, from a team's perspective, the combine's a very, very special place. It allows you to kind of come in, like Matt said, to kind of get the true measurables and medical information on the players that are there. And from a prospect standpoint, anytime you're able to be in one setting all the teams are represented right in front of NBA personnel, it's always a good thing because they're going to continue to evaluate you the moment you step into the league to the moment you leave the league. But I think anytime you're able to kind of get together up under one roof and be evaluated through the interviews, through the encore drills, or the testing of the agilities and all your physical measurements, I think it's always a good idea to be in that type of environment.
Matt, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think I think the combine is an opportunity where you've got the NBA team's full front office and spent a lot of time and money traveling around, figuring out which guys might fit into their program. It's an opportunity to get their entire staff together. That's including the head coach and the general manager. And this day and age, general managers spend a lot of time with their teams, traveling with their teams, and maybe not quite as much time evaluating college prospects. And so it's a chance for everybody to get on the same page and see these guys, and also see some guys, give them an opportunity to move up. I remember last year, Duan Hernandez from Miami didn't play the college season and went into the pre-draft process, as a projected undrafted player. He didn't get invited to the combine off the bat. He got invited to the G League Elite camp, which was sort of like a preliminary camp leading up to the combine. He did really well. Earned a spot in the combine, did well there too, and was drafted by the Toronto Raptors and played in the NBA last year. And so it's an opportunity for guys like that to move the needle and increase their stock.
Doc, how vital is medical information for a team to make a good decision on draft night?
Well, the medical information on these prospects is super, super crucial for these teams as they're making decisions. They're having their roundtable discussions. They have to look at where they're at team-wise and just evaluate the process of where they're going. Like, are we right there on the cusp of being in the upper echelon of the NBA, or have we sustained enough success to where we can take a red flag prospect who may have some issues with his background? And I think a good example of that would be the Denver Nuggets. They were able to take Michael Porter Jr., and I think that season they'd actually finished second in the West with a 54-28 record. And so he was one of those kids that where if his medical background was clean, he probably was going to be a top 5 pick, but he slid down to the Denver Nuggets at 14.
Matt, did medical information ever create any problems for you when you were an agent representing players in the draft?
It didn't too much. However, I did have one time that it was a big issue. I signed a player. This is a handful of years ago, and the player was projected to be a solid second-round pick. I was made aware that he did have a heart condition, but initially I didn't think it was a big concern. He had been cleared, by his school for 4 years, and never missed any games because of the heart condition. However, when I gathered more information on it, I realized it was a bigger issue than we initially thought, and so I made the decision to let teams know before we came in to visit. And long story short, we had just about every team in the league show interest and want to bring him in for an individual workout and team visit. Once they got the information on his heart condition, every single team canceled, and subsequently he went undrafted, and really was just somewhat of a nightmare of a summer because of the medical information.
It seems as if Intel has been playing an increasingly significant role in evaluating prospects. Matt, can you enlighten us on what that process looks like for teams and what teams are generally looking to find when making these Intel calls?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, teams, they call everybody. It's not as simple as just calling college head coaches and assistant coaches. They call support staff, whether that be managers or trainers or academic advisors, and then people that, from their hometown, whether it be AU coaches or high school teachers, pretty much anybody that has crossed paths with these prospects and might be able to provide some insight, on what makes these players tick. The teams are going to be calling. And, as far as what they're looking for, I think they're looking for everything. These teams are asking their owners to spend millions of dollars on these players, and they want to know what they're signing up for. So they just want sort of a lay of the land and comprehensive knowledge about what these players are all about on the floor, off the court, tendencies, habits, personality, really just trying to gather as much information as they possibly can.
Doc, in your experience, has there ever been a situation where Intel was a key factor in your team selecting a player?
Almost definitely. It plays a part in it every single year. We're having our discussions about players and where we want to rank them. And a lot of times it boils down to where these guys might be neck and neck, talent-wise, but what is the background information on these guys saying? And so There was one particular prospect who wanted probably a first round draft selection, but because of the intel came back so negatively, we couldn't take a chance at taking that player at the particular point in time. But because of his talent, he's been able to be the only player that was drafted in 2010 that is currently still on an NBA roster, still playing.
All right, so I'd like to ask you guys about analytics. Doc, you first. Would you consider yourself to be a friend or foe of analytics, and what are your thoughts on using analytics on evaluating draft prospects?
Well, if I had to take draw a hard line in the sand, I would say I'm more so of a foe. I think with the numbers can be manipulated and you can make them say whatever you want to say, but I just don't think the numbers can quantify everything about a potential prospect. You know, you can't measure the heart, the drive, and just different things that numbers can't see that kind of makes a player who he is. And so if I had to, like I said, draw that hard line in the sand, I would say I'm more so of a foe than a friend.
Has the use of analytics changed much since you first began working in the NBA?
Almost definitely. Just as I transition more so over to the coaching side to kind of just see how they work, how they devise game plans, and just how they're using the numbers to devise game plans to see how teams are playing, different tendencies that they may have, or different shots that they may look to take more that night than the other because the numbers suggest that a three from the wing is better than an open shot underneath the basket, which kind of baffles me at times. But I've seen the numbers come into play as coaches devise game plans and strategies, not only for the way they're going to play that night or the rest of the season, but also how they devise defensive schemes against other teams.
Matt, where do you stand with analytics?
Well, I mean, I certainly would be a friend of analytics if it's used properly. I think in regards to evaluating prospects for the NBA draft, I'm not a friend. I think using advanced analytics, from college games or international play, it can be very misleading. And so therefore, I don't really use advanced stats to evaluate prospects. However, I think Doc made a good point. As far as looking at whether it's your own team or your opponents and tendencies and an efficiency with how you're playing, it's a good tool to use to adjust. And then from an individual development standpoint, I think for a player to look at where his most effectiveness is, different shots, different actions, is really helpful as far as where to focus on development and how to really focus on how to play the game.
In the past, some general managers have been quoted saying that their philosophy for the draft is to select the best player available. Matt, do you believe in this philosophy, or would you rather your teams prioritize prospects that fit their current roster?
Well, of course, if you're a team, you want the best player possible. However, if there's not an opportunity for that player to fit into what you're doing, it could be a waste of a pick. So I think there needs to be a certain level of balance of, okay, we need talent, but we also need somebody that fits our vision and maybe fits what we already have in place as far as the other players, and somebody that could complement what's already there. So it just needs to be a healthy balance.
Doc, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with Matt. Just in the past years of being inside the war room, like we've devised a game plan as, set certain aspects or certain prospects are there in our range when we get ready to draft, and those are the guys we're going to go after. But a lot of times you go in with a set plan, and that thing completely changed because of just who you were projecting to be there are no longer there. So then you take the best player available that fits the style of play that you want to implement, or a certain deficiency that your team may have in rebounding or in shooting. So then you start to look at those prospects with those specific skill sets.
The top part of the NBA draft is always filled with freshmen and underclassmen, and it's looking like this year isn't going to be any different. Doc, walk us through your process when evaluating a college player that is older. Is it a big concern for you?
Well, for me personally, it's not a huge concern. There's just been too many examples of players who might have been older players in the college realm that turned out to be very, very solid players. So for me, it's just, I think the usual thing for us scouts is that we're going to these games, you're seeing all the information that's coming out about the players, about potential guys being one and dones. And so then when that player happens to last past his second year, then all of a sudden you begin to poke more and more holes in their games. But there are examples of guys like, the kid Opie Toppin is coming out, who's coming out after 2 years, and also looking at the example of Pascal Siakam, a guy that went on and won Freshman of the Year honors, Player of the Year honors in his second year. Now all of a sudden he's an NBA All-Star and an NBA champion. So there's just too many examples out there of guys who had to take a little bit more time to mature in college and work on different things in their games to become a better pro. And so for me as a scout, it doesn't bother me just whether or not this guy can step on the floor right now and can help us. And in what ways would he be an influence in the locker room?
Matt, are there any older players in this year's draft that you believe would fit into this category?
Yeah, I mean, Doc mentioned one. I mean, Obi Toppin's a little bit older. He comes to mind. Elijah Hughes from Syracuse, Jalen Harris, Malachi Flynn. I mean, guys like this. I think the key thing when you're looking at older players is the evaluation is a little bit different than a younger guy because they're naturally closer to being a finished product. So you need to evaluate them. Okay, how do they fit into the NBA now? Whereas like an 18-year-old, there's more room for growth. And so you're looking at upside. You're looking at, okay, he has some flaws. Can we correct those? And maybe it's just, somewhat of an immaturity issue. And so, Obi Toppin's the number one name for sure. I think he's going to be one of the first few picks. And he's a guy that, is ready to step in and play right away. And I think a big part of that is that he is a little bit older.
Many say that the big man is a dying breed. Doc, do you agree with that idea?
Not entirely. I think the philosophy of being able to play two bigs with the same skill set or one limited, I think that whole notion is dying. But you look at the different tandems that have happened over the course of the years when I was in Portland, we had LaMarcus Aldridge, and we didn't get a chance to see it in its entirety, but having LaMarcus and Greg Oden. So you have a guy like LaMarcus who can spread the floor with his shooting. Greg Oden was a force down low for the limited games that he was able to play. And then you fast forward to the tandem I was able to see firsthand with DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis is a guy that can get out and run the floor like a deer and catch anything and finish on anyone near the rim versus a guy like DeMarcus Cousins who can grab a rebound and push the tempo. And he's an underrated passer. So those guys were able to work very well with each other with that high-low system. But again, having two guys with one with the superior skill set and one not so much occupying the same space allows teams to double team, and it creates poor spacing. So having those two guys with the same skill set or deficient in certain areas, I think that whole notion of playing those type of guys has died down. But guys have just had to become more versatile, be able to spread the floor and just do a lot of different things on the floor versus what they were having to do in the past.
How about you, Matt? What do you think?
Yeah, I think Doc's right. I think the days of playing two traditional big men are gone, and I think the way we evaluate big men, is naturally needed to evolve as well. The game used to be played where a lot of offenses were built through the post. Low post scorers, draw double teams, spread the floor, move the ball around the perimeter. That style is close to dead. I do think, however, there could be a little bit of a coming back, whereas a lot of these teams are built to switch on defense, and there's a lot of small ball. There's a lot of mismatch opportunities. So I think now with a guy like, for example, Onyeka Okongwu from USC, although he's somewhat of an undersized power forward, he's a low post scorer, big bodied five. However, he moves his feet well, so he's a good balance. If he fits the game well, he's not a liability on the defensive end, but he's probably going to be able to expose some mismatches on the offensive end too. So definitely not a dying breed, but the valuation with big men has changed.
So we have a question from one of our Twitter followers. @YoungWizzyDFS asks, for teams that secure a top 5 pick this year, should they trade out of it? If so, which teams?
Great question, Young Wizzy. I think me personally, if I get one of the picks 1 through 7, if you get the chance, go back and check out BabcockHoops.com. And if you look at the draft lottery in which the way it was predicted on there, I think if you're 1 through 7, you keep your pick. I say 1 through 7 because Chicago's right there. They just got a new management a brand new team. So if there's no pressure for them to win right now. So I think if you're 1 through 7, you keep your pick. But anything 8 and below, you trade out. You try to get some veteran leadership, some pieces, some draft picks in hopes that you can potentially win in the coming future.
We have another question from one of our Twitter followers. @Sethi03 asks, what point guards are seen as valued picks in the second round, and where might Ayo Dosunmu from Illinois fit in this group?
Well, the first names that come to mind of guys that I have projected as second-round picks is Malachi Flynn from San Diego State. A transfer from Washington State, junior and older guy that I mentioned before. I think he's capable of stepping in and being a backup point guard next year. A couple other guys, Devin Dotson from Kansas had a terrific year for the Jayhawks, and then Trey Jones from Duke. I think both of those guys, if they are in the second round, could potentially fill roles for teams next year. Those are the three guys that come to mind. And as far as with Dosunmu, first of all, I don't really classify him as a point guard. I see him more as an assertive scorer that's a secondary ball handler. And also, I'm not convinced that he's going to be in this year's draft. I think he's probably somewhat of a 50-50 guy right now. If he does decide to stay in the draft, I do think we will include him in the mock draft. But as of right now, we're anticipating him to go back to school.
To wrap things up today, I have questions for the both of you. With the NBA resuming, what is one playoff matchup that you're hoping to see, and which team are you picking to win it all this year? Doc, you first.
Great question. I think for me, just thinking about just the environment and that are in those locker rooms once that time comes, I'm looking forward to the play-in games. Can you imagine the conversations that the coaches are having with the players, the level of intensity, the level of importance they're putting on that moment? It's like, guys, if we win, we're in and we advance. If we lose, we're done. And so just that whole atmosphere of just the pregame speeches that are being given to those players and getting them to realize the gravity of the situation that's about to take place, I think those playing games are the ones that I'm looking most forward to. And I think in the end, I would like to see an LA Clipper, LA Laker matchup. Will LeBron continue his legacy of trying to be known as the GOAT of the game? Will Anthony Davis get his first championship? Also, on the flip side, you have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Hometown kids who return home. Can they bring a championship to their city and kind of be known for the guys that came back home and brought a ring to the city?
Matt, how about you?
Well, from a matchup standpoint, I'd love to see New Orleans find a way of locking up that 8th spot in the West. And I think, the Pelicans with a healthy Zion Williamson facing the Lakers, that would be pretty exciting. I'd definitely be tuning in for that. As far as, who I have picked to win it all, my dad's been with the Milwaukee Bucks front office for 23 years, so I have to stay loyal to him and the Bucks. And, bias aside, this is a star-driven league, and especially in the playoffs. And in my opinion, they've got the best player in the world in Giannis. And so I'm going with the Bucks.
That's all we have for today. Matt and Doc, thank you for joining me, and thank you to all those who have tuned in. I am Raquel Rodriguez, and this is the Babcock Hoops Q&A sessions. We'll see you next time.